The gate room of Cheyenne Mountain had seen impossible things. In the 7 years since the Stargate program went operational, SG teams had brought back gold symbiotes in containment jars, Asgard holographic messages, and once, memorably, a block of replicators that nearly consumed level 19 before. Carter figured out the EM pulse frequency. Sergeant Harriman had logged enough unscheduled off-world activations to fill 3 filing cabinets. He considered himself unshockable. He had never seen the gate open from the inside out. The kawoosh erupted in reverse, the event horizon stabilizing, with a sound like a thunderclap rather than the familiar whoosh of an outgoing wormhole. Every alarm on the board screamed simultaneously. The iris, titanium, 3 micrometers from the event horizon, capable of reducing a human being to molecular paste, failed to close. Not because of a malfunction. The control crystal simply stopped responding, as if the gate itself had decided the barrier was unnecessary. Unscheduled activation. Iris is not responding. Repeat. Iris is not responding. The security team had 3 seconds between Harriman's call and the figure stepping through. She came through at full stride, as if she had simply walked from one room to another. 6 feet of Amazonian warrior in bronze armor, dark hair streaming, a shield on her back and a sword at her hip, and eyes that swept the gate room with the practiced calm of someone who had walked into enemy fortifications before and found them wanting. She held no weapons in her hands. She didn't need to. The 12 SF personnel raising P90s at her absorbed the tactical situation in the same moment she did. And something in the way she stood, weight perfectly distributed, bracelets catching the gate, room's fluorescent lighting, communicated clearly that the rifles were a formality she was choosing to respect. Rather than a threat she was choosing to fear. The wormhole disengaged behind her. The gate room fell silent except for the continued shriek of alarms. "I am Diana," she said, in accented but precise English, her gaze moving to the control room window where Hammond had appeared, hands flat on the console. "I mean no harm. I am trying to understand where I am." Colonel Jack O'Neill, who had been halfway through a briefing on P2X 774 when the alarms fired, arrived in the gate room doorway with his P90 raised and his expression set to the particular flatness he reserved for situations that were going to give him a headache. He took in the armor, the sword, the bracelets, the absolute absence of fear on her face, and the 12 SF personnel who were all clearly relieved that someone with rank had arrived to make a decision. "Lower your weapons," he said. Not because he was certain it was the right call, because he'd been doing this long enough to know that someone who could walk through a malfunctioning iris without breaking stride was not going to be stopped by P90 fire, and getting his people shot trying to prove otherwise served nobody. He kept his own weapon up. "You, don't move." Diana looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "I was not planning to." "Great. We're off to a great start." He clicked his radio. "Carter, I need you in the gate room. And somebody get Daniel. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below." Indeed, General Hammond reached the gate room floor 90 seconds later, moving with the deliberate authority of a man who had faced system lords via holographic transmission and found the experience only mildly more alarming than a congressional oversight hearing. He stopped 6 feet from Diana and looked up at her. She had several inches on him, with the expression of a man running rapid calculations. "General George Hammond, United States Air Force," he said. "This is a restricted military installation. I need to know how you accessed our gate." "I did not choose to access it," Diana said. Her voice carried no defensiveness, only the precision of someone accustomed to being accurate. "I was on my island. There was a device, stone, circular, covered in markings I did not recognize, though some resembled linear A. It activated when I touched it. There was light, a sound like the ocean compressed into a single moment. And then I was standing in your ring." Hammond looked at O'Neill. O'Neill looked at Hammond. "Linear A," said Daniel Jackson, slightly out of breath, arriving at the gate room door with his jacket half buttoned and his eyes already doing the thing where they got 3 times larger. "That's General. Linear A is an undeciphered Minoan script. It predates Linear B by several centuries. We've never successfully, he stopped. He looked at Diana properly. Oh, oh, that's remarkable. Daniel, O'Neill said. Right? Yes. Sorry. He stepped forward. And to his credit, he was the only person in the room who moved toward her rather than maintaining careful distance. The device on your island. Do you remember any of the symbols? Specifically, did any of them look like constellations? Star patterns? Diana regarded him with careful attention. Many of them. My people have studied the stars for 3,000 years. The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence that settled over the SGC when something impossible became something that required paperwork. Get Dr. Fraser, Hammond said quietly to the nearest SF, and I want this gate room secured. Nobody in or out without my authorization. He turned back to Diana, and his voice shifted into the register he used for first contact. Situations, careful, firm, and genuinely respectful. Ms. Diana, I need to ask you to come with us. We have a lot to discuss. You're not in any danger here, but I need to ask for your cooperation while we figure out what happened. Diana looked at the gate, dark now, inert. The 7 symbols of whatever address had sent her here, already cycling off the diagnostic display. She looked at O'Neill, who still had his weapon half raised. She looked at Daniel, who was practically vibrating. Very well, she said. But I would like answers as well, General. That device on my island has been dormant for as long as my people have records. Something caused it to activate. She paused. I do not believe it was an accident. Hammond nodded slowly. In his experience, when something activated a Stargate after millennia of dormancy, it was never an accident. It was, however, almost always a problem. The briefing room on level 28 had hosted some extraordinary individuals. Thor, Supreme Commander of the Asgard fleet, had occupied the chair at the far end via holographic projection, and somehow managed to make a 4-foot gray alien seem like the most authoritative presence in the room. Bratak had sat across from Hammond and explained Jaffa warrior philosophy with the patience of a man who had been fighting false gods since before O'Neill's grandfather was born. Even Oma Desala had drifted through the mountain once, though she'd been less interested in briefings and more interested in cryptic statements that gave Daniel a headache for a week. Diana of Themyscira sat at the briefing room table with her hands folded, her sword and shield leaning against the wall behind her at Hammond's polite request, and examined each member of SG-1 with the methodical attention of a commander assessing potential allies or threats. The distinction, her expression suggested, remained open. Dr. Fraser had completed her examination 40 minutes earlier, emerging from the medical bay with the look she reserved for results. That broke her reference charts. Diana's cellular structure was human in architecture, but enhanced at a level that made the protein markers Carter had identified in Jaffa symbiote carriers look modest by comparison. Her bone density was 3 times baseline. Her neurological response time had overwhelmed the equipment twice. And the ancient gene detector, the handheld device Carson Beckett had sent from Antarctica during the outpost research phase, had done something nobody expected. It had lit up, not with the clean blue confirmation of ATA gene presence, with a deep, sustained gold that the device had never produced before, humming at a frequency that made the fillings in Fraser's back teeth ache. Not ancient, Carter had said, staring at the readout, but related. Like, she'd searched for the analogy. Like finding a dialect of a language you know. Same roots, different evolution. Now Carter sat to O'Neill's left, her laptop open, pulling up everything the SGC database contained on pre-Hellenic Mediterranean cultures and cross-referencing it with the ancient Cartouche database from Daniel's ongoing translation work. The results were thin but pointed. Hammond opened the briefing. Ms. Diana, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest level of the United States government. Given your arrival method and what our preliminary scans have indicated, I've decided that full disclosure serves us better than the alternative. He glanced at O'Neill, who gave the microscopic shrug that meant he agreed but wanted it on record that he'd had reservations. The ring you came through is called a Stargate. It's one of a network of similar devices distributed across the galaxy, built by an ancient civilization we call the Ancients or the Alterans. Diana's expression shifted, fractionally, but O'Neill had spent enough time reading people in hostile environments to catch it. You recognize that term, he said. Not the word, she said carefully, but the description. A civilization that preceded recorded history, that seeded human populations across great distances. She paused. My people have a name for them. We do not speak it often. It translates, approximately, as the first builders. Daniel made a sound that was technically not appropriate for a military briefing. Carter put her hand on his arm. The device on your island, Daniel said, pulling himself together with visible effort. The one covered in linear A script with star constellation patterns. That's a gate address. It's a dialing interface, like a telephone built into stone. The ancients distributed them near gate installations, usually to guide populations they'd taken an interest in toward the network. When they were ready, he leaned forward. Diana, the ancients didn't just build the Stargates. They seeded human populations on dozens of worlds, guided their development, protected some of them. He held her gaze. I think your island, the Themyscira, was one of those protected sites. The silence that followed was the thoughtful kind rather than the shocked kind. Diana absorbed this with the composure of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that her understanding of history was incomplete. This explains certain things, she said quietly. There are structures on the island's eastern shore, old beyond our oldest records. My mother believed them pre-Amazon. We considered them sacred. A pause. We did not know what they were. We'd very much like to, Daniel said. Daniel. O'Neill's voice carried the gentle warning of a man redirecting an archaeologist before he booked himself a flight to a mythological Greek island. Right? Yes. Daniel sat back. Hammond folded his hands on the table. Here's our situation, Diana. We operate under significant secrecy because Earth is not ready to know it's part of a galaxy-wide network of inhabited worlds. Some of those worlds are under the control of parasitic alien beings who use our mythology, Egyptian gods, Norse gods, as a template for enslaving human populations. They call themselves the Goa'uld. They are not gods. They are very dangerous, very old, and very interested in acquiring power. He met her eyes. Your arrival through our gate was logged. That means it's possible that others with access to gate network traffic detected it. Others, Diana said. It wasn't a question. There's a Goa'uld called Anubis, Carter said. Half ascended, it's complicated. But the short version is that he has access to knowledge and abilities beyond standard Goa'uld capability. He monitors unusual energy signatures across the network. What you registered as on our detectors, she hesitated. I've never seen that reading before. If his sensors are as sophisticated as our intelligence suggests, he noticed. TLC, who had been silent through the entire briefing with the stillness of a man who processed information at his own pace and spoke only when he had something worth saying, finally spoke. In the oldest Jaffa oral traditions, he said, before the Goa'uld consolidated their hold on the human populations of this world, there are accounts of warrior women who refused to kneel, who drove Goa'uld scouts from the Mediterranean coastline. He looked at Diana directly. They were believed to be legend. Diana looked at him with recognition, not of TLC specifically, but of what he represented. A warrior who had served false masters and chosen otherwise. She understood that particular weight. They were not legend, she said. O'Neill set down his coffee. Okay, he said. So, welcome to the Stargate program. Try not to break anything. The request to use the lasso of Hestia during a formal SGC intelligence assessment had come from Hammond, which surprised everyone, including Hammond. It had been Daniel's suggestion, initially offered, with the careful academic framing he used when proposing things that were either brilliant or catastrophic, and Hammond had approved it after 40 minutes of consideration that visibly aged him 2 years. The logic was sound, if uncomfortable. They needed to know everything Diana knew about the device on Themyscira, the ancients' connection to her people, and anything in 3,000 years of Amazon oral history that might relate to Goa'uld activity in the Mediterranean. Standard interrogation methods were not going to extract information from a woman whose neurological response time had broken their equipment, and Diana had agreed with one condition. The lasso worked both ways. It compels truth, she had explained to Hammond, with the directness of someone who considered honesty a tactical asset rather than a vulnerability. from everyone it touches. I will answer your questions. But if I am to trust this program with knowledge of my people, I will ask questions of my own. Hammond had looked at O'Neill. O'Neill had looked at the ceiling. Carter had found something very interesting to study on her laptop screen. Daniel had said, "That seems fair," and received a look from O'Neill. That could have stripped paint. They conducted it in the briefing room with the door closed and only SG-1 present. Diana looped the golden lasso loosely around her own wrist first, a gesture of good faith that Daniel noted and appreciated, and then extended it toward the team. O'Neill went last, because O'Neill always went last in situations where going first would have been the tactically vulnerable choice. He held the lasso with the careful blankness of a man who had survived SEER training and several Goa'uld torture sessions and knew how to compartmentalize. It didn't help. The lasso wasn't interested in compartmentalization. How many people have died because of this program? Diana asked him. O'Neill's jaw tightened. The number that came out was not the sanitized casualty figure from the official reports. It was the real one, the one he carried, the one that included the missions that didn't make it into the public record, the teams that went through the gate and didn't come back, and the name of his son, which had nothing to do with the Stargate program at all, but which the lasso apparently considered relevant context. Diana listened without judgment. That was, O'Neill would think later, the thing that stayed with him. She hadn't asked the question to prosecute him. She'd asked it because she needed to know the full weight of what this program carried, and she'd listened to the answer with the gravity it deserved. "I have led warriors into battles where some did not return," she said. When he finished, the lasso glowed warmly around both their wrists. "The weight of command is the same in any universe. You carry it honestly. That is not nothing, Colonel." O'Neill retrieved his hand, looked at the table for a moment, and said nothing, which, for O'Neill, was a great deal. Diana's answers to their questions came with the same unflinching precision. The device on Themyscirus, Eastern Shore, had been dormant for the entirety of Amazon recorded history, roughly 3,000 years of detailed oral tradition and written records, all of which described it as sacred but inert. It had activated 12 hours before Diana stepped through, accompanied by a deep harmonic resonance that the island's wildlife had responded to before any human felt it. She had been alone when she touched the central crystal. She had not intended to dial anywhere. "The crystal responded to me specifically," she said. "My sisters were present at a distance. None of them triggered the activation. Only when I placed my hand on the primary stone did the sequence begin." Carter was typing rapidly. "ATA gene sensitivity," she said, half to herself. "But not ATA. Whatever her genetic marker is. It's close enough to ancient technology to interface, but it required physical contact with a primed crystal rather than passive activation." She looked up. "Diana, did anything unusual happen on the island in the days before the device activated? Any energy readings, atmospheric disturbances, unusual wildlife behavior?" Diana considered. 3 days before, the island's northwestern shore, where the oldest ruins stand, the ones we do not enter, there was light. Deep within the stone, blue-white. My mother sealed the area and posted guards. Her expression shifted. She did not tell me what she found inside. Daniel sat forward. "There's another device. Something that primed the gate, interface, and triggered the sequence." He looked at Carter. "Something woke up the whole installation. Not just the dialing console. Something or someone," Carter said. The implications settled over the room. Diana had not arrived at the SGC by accident. She had been sent, whether by ancient automated systems responding to some predetermined trigger, or by something more deliberate, was a question that the lasso couldn't answer because Diana herself didn't know. What the lasso could confirm, and did, in the session's final exchange, was Diana's assessment of the Goa'uld threat as described during the briefing. "These beings," she said, "who take human bodies against their will and claim divinity to enslave populations." The golden light around her wrist pulsed. "My people exist because we refused that. We were created by the gods. We believed, though I understand. Now the truth is more complicated, specifically, to stand against that kind of domination." She looked around the table. "For 3,000 years we have protected a single island, hidden from a world that was not ready for us. Pause that carried 3 millennia of weight. Perhaps it is time to protect something larger. TLC inclined his head. Indeed. O'Neill looked at Hammond's empty chair the general had stepped out for the final portion at Diana's request, a gesture she'd made to protect him from whatever classified information the lasso might draw out in directions he couldn't officially unknow. All right, O'Neill said. He picked up his coffee. Let's talk about taking you through a gate. The interview room on level 18 was used for debriefings that required more intimacy than the briefing room's conference table allowed. It had a two-way mirror, a recording system, and a coffee maker that Carter had installed because she spent more time in debrief than most people spent at their actual desks. It was not designed for the particular dynamic that emerged when Dr. Daniel Jackson sat across a small table from an Amazonian princess holding a golden rope and asked if she'd be willing to answer some questions. I want to be transparent about what this is, Diana said, before Daniel could begin. She held the lasso of Hestia across her palms, the golden rope catching the fluorescent light with a warmth that seemed inconsistent with its environment. This is not a weapon. It is a conduit for truth. Those bound by it cannot speak falsely. But it works both ways. She looked at him steadily. I use it only with consent. I am asking for yours. Behind the two-way mirror, O'Neill looked at Carter. Did she just ask Daniel if she could use a magic truth rope on him? It appears so, sir. And he's going to say yes. He's already nodding, sir. Daniel was indeed already nodding, with the expression of a man who considered this an extraordinary research opportunity rather than a potential security concern. Hammond, standing beside O'Neill at the mirror, pinched the bridge of his nose, but said nothing. They'd read enough of Daniel's mission reports to know that his instinct for trust, while occasionally catastrophic, had opened more doors than any tactical approach SG-1 had attempted. Diana looped the lasso loosely around Daniel's wrist. It settled there like warm light rather than physical restraint. Tell me about the ancients, she said. And Daniel told her, not in the careful, classified information-managed way of the briefing room, but with the full rushing honesty of a scholar who had been carrying extraordinary knowledge in compartmentalized silence for years. He told her about the Gate Network, about the plague that had driven the ancients to ascend, about Atlantis, the lost city, the search that had consumed Hammond's planning for the better part of 2 years, about ascension itself, the shedding of physical form for existence as pure energy, the non-interference policy that made ascended beings simultaneously the most powerful and most frustrating entities in the galaxy. He told her about Shari. The lasso didn't compel that. That simply came out, the way things did when the room was honest and the audience was genuinely listening. His wife, taken as a gold host. The years of searching, the ending that wasn't the one he'd wanted. Diana was quiet for a long moment after that. I am sorry, she said, and meant it with the directness of someone who didn't offer condolences as social currency. Thank you. Daniel gathered himself. Your turn. She answered his questions about Themyscira with the same unlayered honesty the lasso required. 3,000 years of Amazonian history, compressed into a debrief that Daniel's pen could barely keep up with. The island's concealment, a divine veil her mother called the god's protection, which Daniel was already mentally recategorizing as ancient cloaking technology. The structures on the eastern shore, which she described in enough architectural detail that Daniel's hand started shaking slightly as he wrote because the column proportions she was describing matched the ancient outpost, designs from the Antarctic site, photographs exactly. The device that sent me here, she said. It was buried beneath the oldest structure. I found it 3 days ago when a tremor exposed the lower chamber. When I touched the central crystal, she paused. There was a moment where I understood something, not in words, in sensation, a pulling, like the tide, but directional, like it recognized me. The ancient gene detector read you as something adjacent to ATA positive. Daniel said carefully, our theory is that the ancients may have genetically influenced the founding population of Themyscira over 3,000 years. Those markers would have evolved differently than they did in other seeded populations. You're not ancient, but you carry something that traces back to them. Diana considered this with the equanimity of someone who had long ago accepted that the mythology she'd been raised on was simultaneously true and incomplete. My mother told me my father was Zeus, she said. A god. Divine power given form. She looked at her bracers. You are telling me there may have been something more complicated at work. I'm telling you that the ancients were extraordinarily advanced. Daniel said carefully. Advanced enough that the line between their technology and what other cultures called divine intervention gets very blurry. He hesitated. I'm not saying your heritage isn't real. I'm saying it might be both things at once. She was quiet again. Then, your turn. He blinked. Sorry, the lasso is still on your wrist. Daniel Jackson. There was something in her voice. That was not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. You said you wanted to understand my people's history. I want to understand something about yours. She met his eyes. This program you work for. These people you protect Earth alongside. You have lost much in service to it. Would you choose it again? The lasso pulsed once, warm against his wrist. Yes, he said, without hesitation, and knew it was true in the way that truths confirmed by external means always felt. Not like revelation, but like recognition. Diana nodded slowly. She unwound the lasso from his wrist and coiled it at her hip. Then you are worth trusting, she said simply. I have found that the willingness to pay a cost, and then pay it again, knowing what it is, that is the only reliable measure of a person's character. Outside the two-way mirror, TLC had arrived silently at O'Neill's shoulder at some point. During the exchange, O'Neill hadn't heard him come in, which was either a testament to TLC's stealth or to how intently O'Neill had been watching. She is a warrior of principle, TLC said quietly. Such individuals are rare. Yeah, O'Neill said. He was already thinking about P4X, designation files, and mission rosters. Carter, get Hammond. I want to talk about taking her through the gate. P3X, 442, had been in the mission database for 8 months as a low priority. Cultural contact, human population, pre-industrial, agricultural. No immediate Goa'uld presence detected on MELP reconnaissance. The kind of world SG-1 visited when Hammond wanted a relatively straightforward first mission for someone new to gate travel. Relatively straightforward, in SGC terminology, meant no immediate weapons fire upon arrival and a 30% chance of coming home on schedule. The gate address dialed in 47 seconds. 7 chevrons locked with the familiar mechanical thunder that never quite became background noise no matter how many times you heard it. Each clunk and grind of the inner ring carrying the particular weight of physics being politely asked to do something it wasn't supposed to. The kawoosh erupted outward and stabilized into the shimmering blue event horizon that Daniel had once described to a congressional committee as the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, which had not gone over well with the budget subcommittee, but was, O'Neill privately agreed, accurate. Diana stood at the base of the ramp and looked at it. Not with fear, not with the performed casualness of someone pretending they weren't affected, with the focused, open attention of a warrior, encountering something genuinely new and choosing to understand it rather than react to it. Her hand moved unconsciously toward her bracer, the way a soldier's hand moves toward a weapon when the environment shifts. Then stilled. The MELP data shows a village approximately 2 kilometers from the gate. Carter said, checking her tablet. Population estimate around 400. They've had contact with gate travelers before, probably Goa'uld, based on the architectural remnants in the eastern section of the settlement. No active Goa'uld presence in the last 8 months. Probably, O'Neill said. Probably, Carter confirmed. Great word, probably. He looked at Diana. First rule of gate travel. The MELP sees what the MELP sees. It does not see what's hiding behind rocks, inside buildings, or in orbit. Anticipate what reconnaissance cannot confirm, Diana said. Yes, my people have a similar principle. I think I'd get along with your people. You would find them challenging, she said, which was clearly meant as a compliment. O'Neill gestured at the event horizon. Ladies first. Diana stepped through without hesitation. The other side of a wormhole was always a reconstruction. The traveler, dematerialized, transmitted as pure energy across light years of space, and reassembled with enough precision that the process was survivable, though Carter had once spent 3 weeks explaining to a senator why this was not technically teleportation, and why the distinction mattered. For most travelers, The experience was a fraction of a second of cold and pressure and then arrival. Mission reports occasionally mentioned a sense of rushing, of compression, of the universe briefly, acknowledging that what was happening to you was objectively improbable. Diana stepped through and emerged on the other side and stopped. And the expression on her face was the one that Neil had stopped, expecting to see in himself and had learned to watch for in others, the expression of a person encountering the fact that the world was genuinely, irreducibly larger than they had believed. The sky of P3X 442 was amber, not the gold of a terrestrial sunset, but a sustained, atmospheric amber produced by a binary star system, whose smaller component sat low on the horizon like a copper coin. The gate stood in a clearing of something that was almost grass, blue-green, low, rustling in warm wind that smelled of mineral earth and something faintly sweet. Mountains in the middle, distance were stratified in colors that had no business occurring in sedimentary rock by Earth's geology, bands of ochre and pale violet, running horizontally across faces that caught the twin starlight. SG-1 came through behind her. TLC emerged last, staff weapon at a carry, eyes already moving across the perimeter. "It is beautiful," Diana said. "Give it 20 minutes, O'Neill said, but not unkindly. The village was 2 kilometers of winding path through cultivated fields where workers paused and stared at the strangers with expressions ranging from wariness to carefully managed blankness. The latter concerned O'Neill more. Wariness was honest. Managed blankness was what people wore when they'd learned that showing the wrong reaction to strangers got them hurt. The village elder who met them at the settlement's edge was a woman in her 60s with the straight-backed carriage of someone who had survived through shrewdness rather than strength and knew the difference between the two. Her name was Marate. She spoke a dialect that Daniel placed as descended from ancient Greek within 30 seconds, which made Diana's head come up sharply. "I can understand her," Diana said quietly. "Not perfectly, but largely." Daniel looked between them with the expression of someone whose academic career had just been simultaneously validated and complicated. Ancient Greek derivative. The Goa'uld seeded this population from Mediterranean stock, probably 2nd century BCE based on the linguistic drift. He was already reaching for his notebook. Marate watched Diana with an attention that went beyond curiosity. When Diana spoke to her directly in the older dialect, carefully, searching for the right register, something shifted in the elder's face. Not recognition exactly. Something older than recognition. Something more like confirmation. "She says," Diana translated slowly, "that her people have a word for women who carry the old power, who came through the ring in the time before memory and drove away the false gods." She paused. "The word is the same as one of our Amazonian sacred titles." The village's eastern section explained itself upon approach. What had looked on MLP imagery like architectural remnants were the remains of a Goa'uld occupation that had ended badly for the occupiers' staff. Weapons scoring on stone walls. The melted remains of a ring transporter platform. And at the center of a cleared space, a block of Naquatavane stone carved with Goa'uld hieroglyphs that made TLC's jaw tighten. "This is a territorial marker," TLC said. "It bears the seal of Kronos." "Kronos is dead," Carter said. "System lords absorbed his territory 18 months ago. Someone will come to reassert the claim," TLC said. "It is the nature of Goa'uld succession." Diana stood before the marker and read the hieroglyphs with eyes that processed them differently than anyone else present, not with Daniel's scholarly translation, but with the visceral recognition of someone who had spent 3,000 years living adjacent to the mythology the Goa'uld had stolen. She read the claim of divine ownership over the people of this world. She read the threat to those who resisted. She read the language of a being who viewed the 400 people farming these fields as property. Her expression did not change, but the air around her bracelets did something that Carter's instruments would later record as a localized electromagnetic fluctuation with no identified source. "These people," Diana said quietly. "How many worlds like this are there?" O'Neill looked at her for a moment. "Thousands," he said. "Give or take." She turned from the marker. Her eyes found Marate, who was watching her from across the clearing with that same expression of ancient confirmation. Then we have work to do, Diana said. The Takare tunnels grew from nothing. That was always the unsettling part, watching the crystal matrix expand through solid rock in real time, the growth medium spreading along pre-calculated stress lines, until chambers appeared where there had been only earth, walls smooth as polished glass and faintly luminescent, the whole structure breathing with the quiet industry of something alive. One had visited enough Takare bases to find the process merely interesting. Diana watched the tunnel walls extend around the newly established chamber with the focused attention she'd given. The gate activation, cataloging rather than reacting, her hand resting loosely near her sword, with the unconscious readiness of someone who had learned never to be entirely unarmed, regardless of who claimed to be an ally. Jacob Carter arrived from the deeper tunnels looking like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days, which was normal for Jacob, and like a man carrying news that had shaken him even through Selmac's considerable capacity for equanimity, which was not. Sam. He embraced his daughter with the brief, fierce grip of a man who had learned not to take reunions for granted. Then he looked at Diana with an expression that was not entirely Jacob and not entirely Selmac, but the particular blend that emerged when the symbiote was actively processing something significant. So, you're real. I find that question less surprising than I once did, Diana said. Jacob pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Selmac's voice emerged in the layered harmonic that distinguished symbiote speech from host, both registers present, neither entirely dominant. I will speak plainly because time does not favor the alternative. 3 days ago, our operative within Anubis's inner intelligence network transmitted a priority communication before going silent. We must assume she has been compromised. A pause. The communication contained a single piece of intelligence. Anubis has been searching for Themyscira for 40 years. The briefing room of the Takare base held SG-1, Jacob, and 2 Takare operatives who had introduced themselves as Garshaw and Aldwin and then positioned themselves near the exits with the practiced subtlety of people who trusted allies, situationally rather than categorically. Diana noted their positioning. She did not comment on it. She understood it. 40 years, Carter said. That predates our gate program by decades. How did he even know it existed? Gold genetic memory, Daniel said slowly, working through it as he spoke. The oldest Gold carry memories going back thousands of years. If their scouts encountered the Amazons in ancient Mediterranean history, if they tried to establish dominance there and were driven back, the memory of that defeat would persist, TLC confirmed. Gold do not forget failures. They catalog them, study them, seek to understand and overcome what bested them. More than that, Selmac said, our operative's intelligence included fragments of Anubis's research. He does not want Themyscira as a conquest. He wants it as a source. The luminescent walls of the tunnel seemed to dim slightly. Or perhaps that was the quality of attention in the room shifting. Anubis is half ascended. His ascension was incomplete, forced by the other ascended beings who recognized what he was and expelled him before the process finished. He exists between states, physical enough to be present in the galaxy, connected enough to access knowledge beyond standard Gold capability. Selmac looked at Diana directly. But the incomplete ascension is also a wound. He has been searching for a way to finish what was started, to fully cross over despite the ascended being's prohibition. And he thinks something about me provides that, Diana said. It was not a question. Your energy signature, Carter said, pulling up the readings from the ancient gene detector on her tablet. When this scanned you, it produced a reading we've never seen before. We theorized it was an evolved form of the ATA gene, but the Takare data suggests something else. She looked at her father, who nodded. The ancients didn't just seed Themyscira with a protected population. They conducted an experiment, a long-term, generational experiment in directed evolution. They introduced genetic material that didn't exist in baseline human populations. She paused. Material that traces back to the ancients themselves, not the ATA gene, something older, pre-ascension genetic markers that the ancients had already evolved beyond when they built the gate network. Diana was quiet for a long moment. Around her, the Takare tunnel hummed with crystal growth. My mother told me that my power comes from the gods, she said finally. She was more accurate than she knew, and less accurate than she believed. She looked at her hands. The bracers caught the tunnel's luminescence and held it. The ancients gave my people something of themselves, and 3,000 years of isolation allowed it to develop into something they did not anticipate. Something Anubis believes he can use as a catalyst, Selmak said. His ritual, and we have only fragments. Our operative did not have full access, requires a living vessel, carrying pre-ascension, ancient genetic material, someone whose connection to the original Alteran genome is strong enough to bridge the gap between his current half-state and full ascension. A pause. He has never found such a person. Until your gate activation registered on the network 3 days ago. O'Neill leaned forward. So we just handed him exactly what he's been looking for 40 years. That is the situation, Colonel O'Neill, Selmak confirmed. For crying out loud. Diana stood in the close quarters of the Takare chamber. Her full height and the quiet, contained energy she carried were more present than they'd been in SGC's larger spaces. What do your people know of Anubis's current location? His fleet moves constantly, Garshaw said from near the exit. We have gate addresses for 3 of his known bases, but he rotates occupancy. He will not expose himself until he is certain of success. Then we must ensure he believes success is possible, Teal'c said. To draw him into the open. You want to use me as bait, Diana said. We want to give you the option, O'Neill said carefully. There was a distinction there that Diana recognized and respected. The difference between commanders who deployed assets and commanders who consulted them. You can also go home. We can establish a new gate address for Themyscira, close the network access to the old one, and work on shielding the island from gold sensor sweeps. Anubis loses the trail. Probably, Diana said, with the exact inflection he had used on P3X 442. It's a good word. She looked at Teal'c, then at Daniel, who was watching her with the honest anxiety of someone who had already lost too many people to gold ambition, then at Carter, whose expression carried the particular tension of a scientist who had just realized that the answer to a 40-year gold obsession was sitting across the table from her, and that protecting that answer was going to require very careful thinking. Then at Jacob Carter, who was watching her with Selmak's patience and a father's carefully concealed fear for his daughter's proximity to this situation. Tell me about Anubis, Diana said. Everything. From the beginning. I will not be bait. Her voice carried the absolute clarity of a decision already made. But I will be the reason he overreaches. Anubis did not receive intelligence the way lesser system lords did. He did not rely on Jaffa messengers, carrying sealed communications or operative networks that could be compromised and turned. He had, in the centuries since his incomplete ascension, developed something that occupied the uncomfortable space between technology and ability, a sensitivity to the gate network's energy architecture that functioned less like a sensor array and more like a sixth sense. The way a spider feels vibration through silk rather than hearing it through air. When something unusual moved through the network, he felt it as a disturbance in a web he had spent millennia learning to read. The activation from Themyscira had hit him like a struck bell. In the inner sanctum of his Hatak, orbiting a dead world whose gate address appeared in no current gold database, Anubis stood before a display that no standard gold technology should have been able to produce, a real-time map of gate network traffic, individual wormhole events rendered as pulses of light across a three-dimensional star chart that filled the chamber. From floor to ceiling, most pulses were familiar. SGC's regular mission traffic from Earth, Takare movements he'd been tracking for years. The Jaffa Rebellion's increasingly bold use of captured gate addresses. The pulse from the Mediterranean coordinates had been different. Not in magnitude. It was a single activation, brief, standard duration. Different in quality. In the signature of what had passed through. He had felt that signature in genetic memory that predated his own physical existence. Inherited through thousands of years of gold consciousness passing between hosts. The memory of scouts returning from the Aegean coastline with reports of women who fought with power that did not come from Naquata, or ancient technology, or anything they. Gold understood. Power that felt, to the symbiotes who had survived those encounters, like touching the edge of something ascended, without the distance that ascended beings maintained. Close, warm, terrifyingly present. He had sent 3 ships. The warning came through Takare channels at 0340 SGC time, routed through 3 gate addresses and delivered via crystallized data packet to the SGC's off-world communication relay. Carter decoded it in the gate room with her jacket over her pajamas and O'Neill standing behind her with coffee that was doing inadequate work against the hour. 3 Hatak-class vessels, bearing Anubis's modified livery, the standard gold pyramid ship design altered, with the dark geometric additions that distinguished his fleet. Last confirmed position, a gate address in the outer rim of gold space. For hyperspace jumps from Earth. Current trajectory, unknown, but the Takare operative who had transmitted before going dark had managed one final data burst that included partial hyperspace. Coordinates. They were heading for the Mediterranean. He's not coming for us, Carter said. He doesn't know she's here. He's going to Themyscira. Diana, who had been summoned from her assigned quarters and arrived looking entirely alert, despite the hour in a way that suggested Amazonian physiology had a different relationship with sleep deprivation than baseline human. Absorb this without visible alarm. My people, she said. The island's cloaked, Daniel said quickly. Whatever ancient concealment technology has been protecting it for 3,000 years is still active. The MELP we retroactively checked against satellite data confirmed it. Themyscira doesn't appear on any sensor sweep we've ever conducted. Standard gold sensors won't penetrate it. Anubis does not use standard gold sensors, TLC said. The silence that followed was the specific quality of silence. That meant everyone in the room had arrived at the same conclusion and nobody wanted to say it first. He'll find the island, Carter said. Maybe not immediately. Maybe it takes him days or weeks. But with his enhanced capabilities, eventually he will. She looked at her tablet. And when he does, for 100 Amazonian warriors with swords and shields against 3 Hatak vessels is not a battle, Diana said. A massacre. Her voice was entirely level. The levelness itself was more alarming than anger would have been. What are our options? O'Neill took a long drink of coffee. In the 7 years he'd been running gate missions, he had developed a reliable taxonomy of impossible situations. Some were impossible in the way that required accepting bad outcomes. Some were impossible in the way that required finding the one angle nobody had tried yet. He mentally sorted this one. We can't engage 3 Hatak with what we've got, he said. Our ships aren't. We have one. Operational 304, and she's 3 days from this position. The Prometheus was currently running resupply to an off-world research station, the kind of scheduling irony that the universe specialized in. Takare don't have the fleet presence for a direct engagement. Asgard, Thor's fleet is engaged with replicator activity in the Othala galaxy. Carter said, I checked before coming down. We can send a message, but response time is uncertain. So direct engagement is out. O'Neill set down his coffee, which means we don't let him find the island at all. He looked at Diana. We give him something better to look at. Diana met his eyes. You are returning to the idea of bait. I'm returning to the idea of controlling where he looks, O'Neill said. There's a difference. Bait is passive. What I'm thinking is, he glanced at Carter. We use the gate network, Carter said, picking up the thread with the fluency of someone who had been finishing O'Neill's tactical thoughts for years. Anubis tracks unusual energy signatures. Diana's signature. If we move through several gate addresses in sequence, creating a trail that leads away from Earth and away from Themyscira toward a location of our choosing, somewhere we have defensive advantage. We redirect his attention, Daniel said. And then we deal with him on ground we pick, O'Neill said. Ancient outpost. P3X 439 has a repository installation. He stopped himself. The last time someone had interfaced with an ancient repository, it had nearly killed him. Different outpost. Carter, what do we have in the database with ancient defensive infrastructure in enough distance from Earth that collateral considerations are minimal? Carter was already pulling addresses. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed of someone who had memorized more gate addresses than most people knew phone numbers. P4X 650. Ancient outpost. Partially excavated by SG 11 8 months ago. Control chair confirmed functional. Defensive drone inventory unknown, but the structure is intact. 2 days by HOTAC from Earth's position if they're tracking a gate trail. 2 days to prepare, O'Neill said. Diana had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she brought to everything. Cataloging, assessing, finding the load-bearing elements. You are proposing that I lead Anubis to a location of your choosing, she said, using my energy signature as the trail. And then we fight him there. That's the broad strokes, yeah. What is the specific plan for when he arrives? O'Neill looked at Carter. Carter looked at her tablet. We're working on that part. Diana nodded slowly. It was not the nod of someone reassured. It was the nod of someone who had fought enough battles to know that the plan was always incomplete, and that the quality of the people executing it mattered more than its completeness. She had assessed SG-1 across 4 days of briefings and a gate mission and a TALK-RA underground negotiation. She had used the lasso on Daniel and watched what honesty looked like in him. She had watched O'Neill make the call to lower weapons in the gate room, which was the kind of tactical restraint that only came from genuine confidence rather than recklessness. She had watched TLC, who said, indeed, instead of filling silence with lesser words, and understood that he had chosen this team the way she would have chosen companions for a long campaign. Not for convenience, but for character. 2 days, she said. Show me everything you know about this outpost. And everything you know about how Anubis fights. A pause. If we are going to make a half-ascended false god overreach, I want to understand exactly how far he can be made to reach. Across the SGC, in the empty gate room, the Stargate stood dormant and waiting. Somewhere in hyperspace, 3 HOTAC vessels carrying the banner of the most dangerous Goa'uld alive were moving toward a trail that didn't exist yet. They had 2 days to build it. Chillac smelled like wood smoke and iron, and the particular cold that came from a sun that gave light, without adequate warmth. A pale distant star that illuminated the planet's dense forests in silver, rather than gold. SG-1 had gated in at dawn by local reckoning, which meant the settlement surrounding the gate was already active. Cook fires, the distant clang of a forge, children moving between structures, with the purposeful efficiency of a culture that assigned responsibility early. Jaffa settlements did not produce idle children. They produced young people who understood that survival was a collective project requiring individual contribution, which was either admirable or a consequence of generational trauma, depending on how Daniel was feeling about it on any given day. Bratak met them at the tree line. He was past 130 years old and moved like a man who considered aging a personal insult he intended to contest indefinitely. His symbiote had been removed 2 years prior during a mission that had nearly killed him and TLC both, and he now sustained himself on Tredonin with the pragmatic acceptance of a warrior who adapted to new conditions without mourning the old ones. He looked at Diana the way he looked at everything, with assessment that was neither friendly nor hostile but purely evaluative. The gaze of a man who had spent over a century determining whether individuals were worth his time. He took longer than usual. TLC tells me you are Amazon, he said finally, in accented English that carried the cadence of a man who had learned the language as a tactical necessity rather than a cultural interest. I am, Diana said. We have a word for your people in the oldest Jaffa. He said it, a compound word in Goa'uld that made TLC's chin lift slightly in recognition. It means, approximately, the women who made the false gods bleed. He paused. I did not expect to see one in my lifetime. I did not expect to be here, Diana said. But I find I am glad of it. Bratak looked at her for another moment, then turned and walked toward the settlement, with the air of a man who had rendered his verdict and moved on. Come, there is food and there is information. In my experience, both are best received together. The information came between bowls of a grain-based stew that Carter diplomatically described as nutritious, and O'Neill diplomatically did not describe at all. Bratak had been running intelligence through the Free Jaffa network for 8 months with the systematic Patience of a man who had survived a century of gold politics by knowing more than he was supposed to and sharing it precisely when it mattered. Anubis's 3 vessels departed there. Holding position 6 hours ago, he said. Our brothers monitoring the outer hyperspace lanes confirm the trajectory. They are not moving directly toward Earth. They are moving toward the Mediterranean coordinates. He looked at Diana. Your island. They will arrive within 30 hours at current speed. That's faster than we calculated, Carter said. Anubis does not travel at standard Hatak speed, TLC said. His vessels carry drive modifications. Another advantage of his partial ascension, he has access to technical knowledge beyond what his Jaffa engineers can fully comprehend, but sufficient to implement. 30 hours changes our preparation window at P4X 650, Carter said, pulling out her tablet. We needed 48. We can compress the timeline, but the control chair interface needs. There is more, Bratak said. He set down his bowl with the deliberateness of a man signaling a shift in gravity. Among the Jaffa who serve Anubis, those who have not yet found the courage for rebellion, there is a story moving through the ranks. A rumor passed between warriors in the way that warriors pass things. They cannot speak openly. He looked at Diana directly. The rumor says that Anubis has found the divine weapon, the one the old texts say could complete his ascension, that he has found the daughter of the first builders, and that when he takes her power, no force in the galaxy will be able to oppose him. He's already telling his Jaffa he has me, Diana said. Not alarm. Analysis. Before he has made any contact. Before any engagement. It is a psychological tactic, TLC said. If his warriors believe victory is already determined, they fight without doubt. Doubt is the greatest vulnerability of any army. It is also an overreach, Diana said. She had said this before, in the Takare tunnels, laying out the principle she intended to exploit. Now she was seeing its first manifestation. He is so certain of success that he is celebrating before the battle. I have fought opponents like this. Something in her voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of Amazonian martial history. They are dangerous, but they are also predictable. How so? O'Neill asked. A commander who believes the outcome is certain stops truly planning for contingency, she said. He commits fully to his chosen approach because he cannot conceive of it failing. When it begins to fail, he escalates rather than adapts. He pushes harder into the strategy. That is not working, because his certainty cannot accommodate the alternative. She looked around the table. We do not need to defeat 3 Hatak vessels. We need to make Anubis abandon them. The table was quiet for a moment as SG-1 processed this particular reframing. She's right, Carter said slowly. If we draw him to P4X 650, and he engages us there, personally, with his half-ascended abilities rather than his fleet, the Hatak hold position and wait for his signal. Standard Gold Protocol. The fleet doesn't engage until the system Lord commands. So we need him to come down to the outpost himself, Daniel said. Get him off his ship. He will come, Bratak said with certainty. Whatever power he believes this woman carries, he will want to claim it himself. No system. Lord delegates the acquisition of something they have sought for 40 years. Diana nodded. Then we ensure the outpost presents him with something he cannot resist observing. Directly, she looked at Carter. You said the control chair is functional. What would happen if someone with my genetic signature interfaced with it? Carter opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I have no idea, she said, with the honest excitement of a scientist confronting genuine uncertainty. The control chair is designed for ATA gene activation. Your signature is related but distinct. It might not respond. It might respond differently than standard. It might. She stopped herself from completing the sentence. It might do something we cannot predict, Diana finished. Which is exactly what Anubis will want to see, O'Neill said. Following the logic to its destination. He tracks the energy signature. We make sure the signature spikes at P4X 650 when the chair activates. He sees a power event. He's been hunting for 40 years, and he comes to investigate. Personally, he looked at Diana. You're comfortable with this plan? I am comfortable with plans that give the enemy a reason to make mistakes, she said. What I need to know is what we do when he arrives. Because a control chair interaction with unknown outcomes is not a weapon I can plan around. No, O'Neill agreed. But I know someone who's interfaced with more ancient technology than anyone alive. He looked at TLC. Get Hammond on the radio. I need to make a call to someone who's going to be very unhappy about being involved in this. Bratak had been watching Diana throughout the meal and the briefing, with the particular quality of attention he gave to individuals he was reconsidering. He had revised his assessment of many people over 130 years. He was revising his assessment of her now, upward, in the specific direction of the very small category he reserved for warriors whose presence in a battle genuinely altered its outcome, rather than merely contributing to it. There is one more thing, he said, before they rose from the table. He reached into his robes and produced a data crystal, gold manufacture, the kind used for intelligence storage. Our operative within Anubis's fleet, before she was compromised, she managed to transmit one additional fragment we did not include in the initial report, because we did not understand its significance. He held it toward Diana. We understand it now. Carter interfaced the crystal with her tablet. The translated fragment appeared on screen, partial, corrupted at the edges, but legible at its core. It was a gold transcription of a much older text, pre-dynastic, the kind of document that appeared in gold archives only when a system lord had gone to extraordinary lengths to excavate history that predated their own genetic memory. It described the Amazons, not as warriors who had driven back gold scouts, as guardians, specifically, as guardians of an ancient installation that had been sealed when the ancients abandoned Earth, sealed, not with technology, but with biology. A living lock requiring the genetic signature of the Ultran-seeded bloodline to open. A lock built into the structures on the eastern shore of an island that had been hidden from the galaxy for 3,000 years. There is something beneath Themyscira, Daniel said quietly, reading over Carter's shoulder. Something the ancients locked away. And Diana is the key. The wood smoke smell of Chillac drifted through the open doorway. Somewhere outside, a child was running, boots on packed earth, the sound of someone who did not yet know how large the problems were that lived above the treeline. Diana looked at the fragment on Carter's screen and understood that the scope of what she had stepped into when she touched that stone device on her island was considerably larger than she had believed. Then we must reach it before he does, she said. P4X 650 existed at the edge of what SG-11 had optimistically cataloged as promising for further investigation, and what O'Neill more accurately described as the universe's least hospitable real estate. The planet's surface was a high-altitude plateau scoured by winds that came from everywhere. Simultaneously, the kind of environment that suggested the atmosphere itself had unresolved grievances. The ancient outpost was built into the plateau's bedrock, accessible through an entrance that SG-11 had excavated from beneath. 12 centuries of sediment accumulation, a low, arched doorway of the pale gray material the ancients favored, unmarked by external ornamentation because the ancients had apparently considered signage unnecessary for civilizations advanced enough to find their installations. The interior was different. Every ancient outpost carried its own character, shaped by purpose and era and the particular priorities of whoever had overseen its construction. The Antarctic outpost was military, stark, functional, built around the weapons chair with the economical design philosophy of people who had been fighting a war. The outpost beneath Glastonbury that SG-1 had briefly accessed the previous year was archival, shelves of data crystals, a library of knowledge preserved against entropy. P4X 650 was something else. The central chamber was circular, domed, the ceiling a continuous surface of the same pale material as the walls but threaded with patterns that caught the portable lighting SG-11 had installed and distributed it in ways that didn't entirely follow the physics of reflection. At the chamber's center, the control chair stood on a raised dais, white, curved, oriented toward the dome's apex, and the air around it had the quality that Carter had learned to associate with active ancient technology, a slight pressure against the sinuses, a warmth that had no identifiable source. Diana stood at the chamber's entrance and felt it, not the way Carter felt it, as instrument readings and electromagnetic data, as something closer to recognition. The same pull she had described from the stone device on Themyscira, directional and intentional, as if the chamber was oriented toward her specifically. The chair will need to activate and produce a significant energy signature before Anubis's sensors confirm his target, Carter said, setting up her monitoring equipment along the chamber's curved wall. She had spent the gate journey from Chillac running calculations on her laptop and arrived with the focused intensity of someone who had converted anxiety into productivity. Based on the talk RA data on his sensor capabilities, we need a sustained output for at least 4 minutes, long enough for his ships to confirm the location, and for him to make the decision to come down personally. And if the chair does not respond to my signature? Diana asked. Then we go to contingency, O'Neill said. What is contingency? We're still working on contingency. Diana looked at him. He looked back with the expression of a man who had survived enough missions that had gone sideways to have developed a philosophical relationship with incomplete planning. I appreciate your honesty, she said. It's a gift. TLC had taken position at the outpost entrance, with a staff weapon and the expression of a man who intended to make the entrance significantly less accessible to anyone attempting it without invitation. Daniel was at the far wall, examining a series of markings that had him making small sounds of academic distress, the kind that meant he'd found something significant and was furious he didn't have 3 weeks to study it properly. O'Neill moved through the chamber with the systematic thoroughness of a soldier identifying defensive positions and angles of approach, a process he conducted with the same focused attention regardless of environment. 30 minutes until Anubis's fleet reaches the coordinates we seeded in the gate network. Carter said, the energy trail from our gate activations should read as consistent with Diana's signature moving through the network. If his sensor interpretation is what our intelligence suggests, he'll calculate P4X 650 as the terminus point. How long between fleet arrival and personal engagement? Diana asked. If Bratak's assessment is correct and he comes personally rather than sending Jaffa first, maybe 20 minutes. He'll want to observe before he moves. Confirm the signature is genuine. Carter paused. He's cautious for a gold. The half-ascension gives him patience that most system lords don't have. Cautious until he isn't, Diana said. We established that. Right. So the chair activation needs to give him something that breaks through the caution. Carter looked at the control chair. Something that looks like the power event he's been hunting for 40 years is actually occurring. Diana walked to the dais. She stood before the chair and looked at it with the measuring attention she brought to unfamiliar weapons, assessing weight, reach, the relationship between the tool and the hand that would wield it. The chair was sized for an adult human, the material smooth and slightly warm to the touch when she rested her fingers on its arm. The patterns in the ceiling above it shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but Carter's instruments registered it immediately. It's responding, Carter said. Just from proximity. Diana, your baseline energy output is already interacting with the chair's dormant systems. She looked up from her tablet. This might work better than we hoped, or differently than we hoped, Diana said. Those are often the same thing. Diana sat. The chair reclined, slowly, the way they always did. The ancients apparently having decided that the appropriate posture for operating weapons systems capable of destroying hot-tack vessels was something close to horizontal, a design choice that O'Neill had opinions about, and the chamber responded, not with the blue-white surge of standard ATA activation, with something gold. The patterns in the ceiling brightened from pale luminescence to warm amber, and the air pressure that Carter had noted upon entry intensified, and the monitoring equipment on the wall registered an energy output that climbed past the parameters Carter had been expecting and kept climbing. Carter stared at her readings. That's not standard chair activation. She's not accessing the weapon systems. She's accessing something underneath them, a subsystem I've never seen in any ancient outpost. Her voice had shifted into the register she used when science was doing something she hadn't anticipated, and she was simultaneously alarmed and thrilled. The power signature is, it's reading as pre-ascension ancient, not the construction era. Tech. Earlier. Like a layer of the installation that predates the outpost itself. What does that mean? O'Neill asked. It means the ancients built this outpost around something that already existed, Daniel said from the far wall. He had stopped examining the markings. He was staring at the floor, at patterns emerging in the pale material beneath their feet, tracing outward from the chair's dais like roots from a tree. The same gold as the ceiling above. Jack, these markings on the wall. I've been trying to read them as ancient, but they're not. They're older. They're the same script as the device on Themyscira. He looked up. This outpost isn't just an ancient installation. It's built on a node of the same network that connects to Diana's island. The ancients didn't build it here because the location was strategically useful. He gestured at Diana in the chair, at the golden patterns spreading through the floor, at the ceiling burning warm amber above them. They built it here because she was eventually going to sit in that chair. The wind outside screamed across the plateau. The chamber held its warmth against it. Diana kept her hands on the chair's arms and felt the connection, the way she had felt the device on Themyscira, directional, intentional, something vast and patient that had been waiting for a specific arrival. But where Themyscira had felt like a door opening, this felt like a map unfolding. She could sense the gate network not as Carter described it, addresses, coordinates, physics, but as something alive. Thousands of connections, each one a thread of something the ancients had woven into the fabric of the galaxy. And at dozens of points across that network, signatures like her own, faint, dormant. 3,000 years of isolation and genetic drift had quieted them, but they were there. Her people were not the only ones. The ancients had seeded more than one island. She filed this understanding for later because the chamber's external sensors interfaced with her through the chair in ways she was still learning to interpret. Registered 3 Hatak vessels dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They're here, she said. Carter confirmed it on her tablet 4 seconds later. 3 Hatak, holding position at the system's edge. Scanning. A pause. They've confirmed the signature. Anubis knows we're here. Another pause, longer. One ship is separating from the formation, moving toward the planet. Personal transport, TLC said from the entrance. He comes himself. O'Neill moved to Diana's side. You can disengage from the chair. We need you mobile for what comes next. Diana opened her eyes. The gold faded slowly from the ceiling, the patterns in the floor dimming to dormancy. She rose from the chair with the steadiness of someone who had interfaced with something vast and come back from it intact, which was not a given and which Carter noted for the mission report she was already composing mentally. How long? Diana asked. 15 minutes, Carter said. Maybe less. Diana reached for her sword. The familiar weight of it settled in her hand with the simplicity of something that had never needed to be anything other than what it was, sharp, balanced, honest in its purpose in a way that the chamber's ancient mysteries were not. Then let us discuss exactly how we make him overreach, she said. O'Neill almost smiled. Now you're speaking my language. Outside, on the plateau, the wind continued its argument with the landscape. Somewhere above the cloud layer, a system Lord's transport was descending through atmosphere toward an installation he had been hunting for 40 years, toward a power he believed he understood, toward a woman who had driven his predecessors from the Aegean coastline and had spent the intervening millennia getting considerably better at it. He had no idea what was waiting for him. That was, Diana reflected, precisely the point. Anubis came through the outpost entrance like a wound in the air. That was the only accurate description Diana could find for it afterward, not a dramatic entrance, not the theatrical arrival of a Goa'uld accustomed to performance, but something that felt like the atmosphere itself had been briefly violated. He wore the robes and mask that his intelligence file had prepared her for, the dark shroud that concealed a physical form that was simultaneously present and not, the consequence of an ascension that had been interrupted mid-process and left him existing in the gap between states, where a standard Goa'uld's eyes would flash with symbiote activity. What showed through the mask's apertures was something else, a luminescence. That was neither the gold of Goa'uld nor the white of ascended beings, but something between. like light that hadn't decided what it wanted to be. He stopped at the chamber entrance and looked at the control chair, which was dormant now. He looked at Carter's monitoring equipment along the walls. He looked at Daniel, who was standing near the far wall, with the careful stillness of someone who had learned that remaining unthreatening in the presence of system lords was a survival skill worth cultivating. He looked at O'Neill, who had positioned himself at the chamber's left side with his P90 in a carry that communicated readiness without aggression, a distinction that mattered in tactical negotiations, even when one party was a half-ascended parasitic false god. Then he looked at Diana. His assessment lasted 4 seconds. She counted them with the patience of a warrior who had learned that the quality of an opponent's evaluation told you more about their capabilities than any intelligence file. I had begun to believe you were mythology, he said. His voice carried the dual resonance of Gold's speech. But beneath the layered harmonics there was something else, a register that didn't belong to the symbiote or the host, but to whatever occupied the space between his physical and ascended states. It made the air in the chamber feel thinner. 3,000 years. I reviewed accounts from 37 Gold genetic memory lines. Every one described something that could not exist within the parameters of this galaxy's biology. He moved into the chamber with the measured pace of a being who had learned that movement communicated certainty more effectively than speed. And yet, Diana agreed. She stood at the chamber's center, between the control chair and the entrance, in the position she and O'Neill had selected during their 15 minutes of preparation, defensible, visible, with clear lines to the 3 angles of approach they'd mapped. Her sword was sheathed. Her hands were open, the posture of someone who had not yet decided whether this required violence, which was different from the posture of someone who was uncertain whether they could provide it. You activated this installation, Anubis said. He was looking at the ceiling, at the faint traces of gold still threading through the material where Diana's interface had not fully faded. The subsystem beneath the standard ancient architecture. I detected its signature from the edge of this system. He looked back at her. You did not know what you were activating. No, she said. Honest. The lasso was at her hip, but she didn't need it to recognize that honesty, carefully deployed, was its own tactical instrument. I did not. But you understand now. He had reached the center of the chamber, 8 feet from her, and stopped. At this distance, the wrongness of his physical presence was more acute, the way the air around him had a different quality, the way the chamber's faint luminescence avoided him rather than falling across him as it did every other surface. The network your predecessors were placed to guard, the nodes distributed across human-seeded worlds, the installation beneath your island, that the ancients sealed with your bloodlines. Signature. His head tilted. They built you as a key, Amazon. A very patient, very long-term key. Did it not occur to you to wonder what door you were meant to open? It occurred to me, Diana said. I am still determining whether I should. Behind Anubis, O'Neill had moved 3 feet along the chamber wall. Carter had her hand near the emergency locator that would trigger the talk array extraction protocol, not a rescue exactly, since the talk array had been candid about their response time, but a contingency that bought options. TLC was at the entrance, which Anubis had not sealed behind him, which was either confidence or oversight, and the distinction mattered considerably. You cannot open it without understanding it, Anubis said, and you cannot understand it fully without what I carry. He moved one hand, a gesture that was almost casual, almost human, ruined by the way the air displaced around it incorrectly. I have spent a century accumulating what the ancients knew at the moment of their ascension, knowledge that exists nowhere in the physical galaxy, knowledge of what your bloodline was designed to unlock and why it was sealed. A pause. I am offering you comprehension, Diana of Themyscira, an alliance. What lies beneath your island, fully accessed, fully understood, it would be sufficient for both our purposes. What lies beneath my island, Diana said carefully, belongs to my people. It was placed in our guardianship. Your people are 400 warriors on a hidden island, Anubis said, and the dismissiveness was so absolute it almost functioned as honesty. What was placed in your guardianship is a power that could alter the balance of this galaxy. It deserves a custodian with a galactic perspective. such as yourself, such as a being capable of ascension, of operating in the plane where such power has genuine consequence. His luminescent regard did not shift from her face. You carry the key. I carry the knowledge of the door. The mathematics are straightforward. The mathematics, Diana said, assume I am interested in your offer. The air in the chamber changed. Not dramatically. Anubis was too controlled for dramatics. But the quality of his attention shifted from negotiation to assessment of a different kind. You came here to fight me, he said. You constructed a trail through the gate network. You activated this installation to confirm my target coordinates. You positioned your team throughout this chamber. He looked at O'Neill, at Carter, at the entrance where TLC stood. A competent tactical arrangement. Against a standard Goa'uld, it might be sufficient. We're aware you're not a standard Goa'uld, O'Neill said from the wall. Then you understand the problem with your plan, Anubis said. And he raised his hand. The telekinetic force that the half-ascended could generate was documented in SGC. Mission reports. Oh, Neil had survived it twice. Both times with injuries significant enough to require extended recovery. What Anubis produced now was not the focused beam of an attack, but an expanding pressure wave. The kind that cleared a room rather than targeted an individual. And Diana was moving before it completed its expansion. Her bracelets crossed. In front of her, and the pressure wave hit them in the chamber filled with the sound of a thunderclap and a burst of gold light that threw every shadow in the room into sharp relief. Diana had planted her feet and leaned into it, braced the way she braced against Ares in a memory that was ancient and specific. And she held. The floor cracked beneath her boots. The pale material of the ancient outpost, which had survived thousands of years of plateau wind and seismic activity, developed a spiderweb, fracture pattern extending 18 inches in every direction from her stance. She held. Anubis stopped. For seconds of silence. Remarkable, he said, and meant it. She could hear the genuine assessment in it. Beneath the Goa'uld resonance. The bracelets are not ancient. Manufacture. Pre-ancient. The Alterans themselves couldn't produce. He stopped himself from completing the analysis, which told Diana that he had just revealed more than he intended. You are more than the key. The seeding went deeper than my research indicated. Yes, Diana said. It did. She moved. 3,000 years of Amazonian martial tradition, refined by women who had started with the fighting knowledge of ancient-era Mediterranean warriors and then had 3 millennia of uninterrupted practice to improve on it. Diana crossed the 8 feet between them before Anubis completed his next gesture. Her sword was out, not because she believed a blade could cut a half-ascended being. She had assessed that probability and found it insufficient, but because the engagement of physical combat required him to respond physically, and a physical response meant his half-ascended abilities were being routed through the constraints of the body he was anchored to. She was right. His response was physical, a shield of force that her sword rang against and deflected with a screech of energy, a counter-strike with his other hand that she rolled under with the fluency of someone for whom evasion was as natural as breathing. She came up and her elbow connected with the physical anchor of him, the robed form beneath the shroud, and the grunt that came from it was biological and unmodified and very satisfying. He threw her. She hit the chamber wall at a velocity that would have killed a baseline human, the pale ancient material cracking on impact, and came off it in the same motion she'd gone into it, rolling, landing, already moving back toward center. The chamber was a storm of energy now, his projections, her bracelet's deflections, ricocheting light and force that made Carter press herself against the monitoring equipment and made O'Neill bark at Daniel to get down. Anubis was escalating. Diana could see it, the precise pattern of an opponent who had encountered unexpected resistance and was increasing force. Rather than changing strategy, he was pushing harder into the approach that was not working, exactly as she had predicted. Carter, O'Neill called. Now would be good. Carter hit the control on the data crystal interface she'd spent 14 minutes rigging to the outpost's communication system during their preparation window. The crystal broadcast on a frequency that the talk RA had provided, a precise modulation that the Asgard had confirmed. via a message that Thor had managed to send despite his fleet's engagement, would interact with the half-ascended state in a specific way. Not a weapon, a signal, the frequency at which ascended beings communicated with each other across planes. It was, in essence, a very loud and very precise broadcast on the channel that the other ascended beings used, the ones who had expelled Anubis from their plane, who maintained the non-interference policy with the particular vigilance of people who knew what Anubis was capable of, saying that Anubis was here, was attempting to forcibly complete his ascension, and was doing so using a living person as a catalyst. The response was not immediate. It was not dramatic. It was a change in the quality of the light in the chamber, a shift from the gold of Diana's bracers and the amber of the activated chair to something white and sourceless and very old. Anubis stopped mid-projection. The white light gathered at the chamber's dome apex. Diana lowered her sword. The SGC personnel held position. Anubis looked upward at something that was not visible in the electromagnetic spectrum but was clearly visible to whatever occupied his half-ascended awareness. And for the first time in the engagement, his posture communicated something other than calculated certainty. It communicated a being who had just realized he had made the mistake that his opponents had spent a week engineering. "You called them," he said. Not to Diana. To O'Neill. "We called their attention," O'Neill said. Diana did the rest. By being exactly what she is, where you could find her. Doing exactly what you'd been planning to do to her for 40 years. He tilted his head. Turns out ascended beings really don't like it when someone tries to force the process, especially someone they already expelled once. Anubis looked at Diana. In the white light that was gathering pressure in the chamber, his luminescent regard carried something she had not seen in it previously. He had been outmaneuvered. He knew it, and the knowing of it, in a being of his age and intelligence, had a specific quality, not defeat exactly, but the recognition that the board had been arranged. While he was still reading the pieces, "This is not finished," he said. "No," Diana agreed. "It is not." The white light contracted sharply, and Anubis was gone, not destroyed, not defeated, but pulled, removed. By what authority or mechanism? Diana did not have the framework to fully describe, but the chamber was empty of his presence, with the completeness of something that had been corrected, rather than merely displaced. The chamber was silent. The ancient material settled. The fractures in the floor remained. O'Neill lowered his P90. He looked at the empty space where Anubis had been. He looked at Diana, who was sheathing her sword with the controlled deliberateness of someone returning from a high state of readiness. He looked at Carter, who was already reading her instruments, with the expression of someone whose data had just produced 17 new questions for every one it had answered. "Indeed," said Teal C from the entrance. O'Neill looked at him. "You've been waiting to use that." "I have been waiting for the appropriate moment," Teal C confirmed. This was it. Diana looked at the ceiling where the white light had been. The dome was pale and ordinary again, the gold threading faded. The pre-ancient subsystem dormant. Whatever the ascended beings had done with Anubis, wherever they had taken their correction, was beyond the chamber's ability to register. But his 3 hot-tack vessels were still in orbit, and the intelligence in the TalkRA data crystal about Themyscira was still true. And beneath the eastern shore of an island hidden for 3,000 years, something the ancients had sealed with her bloodline's signature was waiting. The immediate threat had been removed. The larger question had only just begun. The 3 hot-tack vessels held position in orbit for 11 hours after Anubis's removal, before their senior Jaffa commanders made a decision that reflected the particular pragmatism of warriors who had spent lifetimes serving a master they feared rather than respected. Without a system lord to provide orders, the fleet's chain of command defaulted to the ranking first prime, a veteran named Ragnar who had been moving quietly toward the Free Jaffa Rebellion for 8 months and who recognized the moment he was in with the clarity of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of structural collapse. He opened a radio channel to the SGC frequency that Teal C had broadcast on a standard Jaffa military band, a frequency every Jaffa soldier knew, the one the rebellion used for open recruitment, and stated simply that his fleet was standing down, that he was requesting communication with the Free Jaffa Council, and that he had 2 Hatak vessels and their crews to offer the rebellion, if someone could tell him where to bring them. TLC spent 40 minutes on the radio with him. Oh, Neil spent those 40 minutes sitting on the outpost steps in the plateau wind, drinking coffee from a thermos. Carter had thought to pack and watching the amber sky of P4X 650 transition toward whatever passed for evening at this latitude. Diana sat beside him, which he hadn't suggested and didn't mind. She had cleaned her sword and resheathed it and was looking at the sky with the expression of someone processing an experience that had confirmed several things they'd suspected and revealed several things they hadn't. Your plan worked, she said. Our plan, he said. She accepted the correction with a slight inclination of her head that was more Amazonian than anything he had a cultural reference for, but that communicated acknowledgement clearly enough. Our plan, though the component I contributed was primarily existing exactly right, in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, O'Neill said. In my experience, that's most of what good planning actually is. She looked at him sideways. You are more philosophical than your manner suggests. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation. The wind moved across the plateau with the consistency of something that had been doing this for geological epochs and intended to continue. Below them, through the outpost entrance, they could hear Carter's voice cycling through the technical debrief she conducted after every significant energy event, instruments, readings, anomalies cataloged in the precise sequence of a scientist who treated data as a moral responsibility. Daniel was at the wall with the pre-ancient markings, making recordings he would spend the next 3 weeks analyzing, occasionally making sounds that suggested the analysis was going to require significantly longer than 3 weeks. The ascended beings did not destroy him, Diana said. It wasn't an objection, an observation, working toward a question. They don't, usually, O'Neill said. They contain, redirect. It's a whole thing. Daniel can explain it better than I can. But the short version is that ascended beings have rules about direct action, and Anubis has been walking the edge of those rules for years. Today he stepped over one they couldn't ignore. He paused. He'll be back. Different form, different approach, but beings like that don't stop. No, Diana agreed. They don't. She was quiet for a moment. On Themyscira, we have a saying. The battle you win completely is the one your enemy chose. The battle worth winning is the one you chose. O'Neill thought about that. We chose this one. We did. He finished his coffee. Above them, the sky had shifted from amber toward something deeper, the binary stars descending in tandem, and the first stars of P4X 650s. Night were appearing different constellations than Earth's, different arrangements, but the same stars that the Stargate network connected across the breadth of the galaxy, every world under every sky, linked by rings of ancient stone and metal built by people who had understood something about connection that their successors were still learning. Hammond's debrief ran 3 hours, which was short by SGC standards for a mission that had involved a half-ascended system lord, an ascended being's intervention, 2 captured Hatak vessels, and the discovery of a pre-ancient subsystem beneath an outpost that shouldn't have had one. Diana sat at the briefing room table and answered questions with the directness and precision that Hammond had come to expect from her in the 72 hours since her arrival. And O'Neill sat across from her and added context when her answers generated the kind of follow-up questions that required familiarity with SGC operational history. At the debrief's conclusion, Hammond folded his hands on the table in the way he did when he was about to say something he had already decided but wanted to frame carefully. Diana, he said, what the SGC encountered today, the pre-ancient network, the nodes distributed across seeded worlds, the installation beneath Themyscira, represents a category of discovery that we don't have a framework for yet. Dr. Jackson's preliminary analysis suggests we're looking at an infrastructure that predates the gate network itself, possibly predates the ancients' physical era. He paused. Your bloodline is the key to accessing it, which means that whatever this network was built to contain or connect or protect, you are central to understanding it. I am aware, Diana said. That puts you in a position that's going to attract Attention from every faction with awareness of what happened today. TalkRA intelligence will have the broad strokes within a week. The Free Jaffa Council is already asking TLC questions. And Anubis, wherever he's been contained, will eventually find a way back to this. Hammond met her eyes. I'd like to offer you a formal liaison role with the SGC, not a military position. You don't answer to our chain of command. And I wouldn't insult you by suggesting otherwise. A partnership, access to our gate network, our resources, our intelligence, in exchange for your cooperation in investigating what lies beneath Themyscira and what it connects to. Diana looked at him for a long moment, then at O'Neill, who was affecting the carefully neutral expression he used when he had an opinion he was choosing not to impose, then at Carter, who was not affecting neutrality at all and whose expression said that the scientific implications of Diana's cooperation were sufficient to make the question's answer obvious. Then at Daniel, who was looking at her with the honest hope of someone who had used a truth lasso in good faith and received the same in return. Then at TLC, who was looking at her with the steady regard of a warrior who had chosen his team carefully and considered the choice worth making again. There are conditions, Diana said. I'd be surprised if there weren't, Hammond said. Themyscira's location remains classified above your highest current clearance level. My people's existence is not disclosed to any government, oversight body, or allied faction without my explicit approval. She held his gaze. The installation beneath the island is accessed on my timeline, not the SGC's. I will not be rushed by political considerations or military urgency into opening something the ancients sealed for reasons we do not yet understand. Agreed, Hammond said, without hesitation. And if I determine at any point that the SGC's objectives and my people's safety are in conflict, she let that sentence complete itself in the silence. You walk, O'Neill said. No argument, no containment, no NID involvement. You walk. Hammond looked at him. O'Neill looked back with the expression of a man who had already decided this was the only acceptable answer and had said it before. Hammond could deliberate. Hammond nodded. Agreed. Diana was quiet for a moment longer. Through the briefing room window, the gate room below was visible, the Stargate standing dormant, the ramp empty, the iris closed. 3,000 years ago, her ancestors had driven gold scouts from the Aegean coastline and returned to an island, hidden from the world, and the choice had been correct for its time. The galaxy that existed beyond that island now was not the galaxy her ancestors had known. The false gods were still present, still claiming dominion over humans who deserved better. But there were also people like these, a general who asked before assuming, a colonel who set down his weapon and then kept his word, a scientist who put on a truth lasso because he thought it was the honest thing to do. The gate network stretched across the galaxy, thousands of worlds connected by ancient design, and on dozens of those worlds, signatures like her own were dormant and waiting. She had felt them through the control chair. She had not mentioned this yet because she was still determining what it meant and whether she understood it well enough to share it responsibly. She would tell Daniel first, she decided, with the lasso present if he wanted, so he'd know she was being fully honest. He would appreciate that. Then we have an agreement, she said. Hammond extended his hand across the table. Diana looked at it for a moment. The human gesture of contract, so much simpler than the Amazonian formal oaths that involved witnesses and drawn blades and the invocation of ancestors, and shook it. Welcome to the Stargate program, Hammond said. Formally. Indeed, TLC said. O'Neill pointed at him. I knew you were going to do that again. I knew that you knew, TLC said. I did it regardless. Diana looked between them with the expression she had been developing over 4 days of SG-1 proximity, the one that meant she found them genuinely baffling and entirely trustworthy, which she was beginning to understand were not mutually exclusive qualities in this particular team. She was also beginning to understand that this was, in its way, the best possible recommendation. That evening, alone in the quarters the SGC had assigned her, Diana stood at the small window that looked out on the Colorado mountain and considered the gate address that Carter had established. For Themyscira, a new one, secure, accessible only through SGC systems with her authorization required. She could go home. She should go home. Her mother needed to be told what had happened, what lay beneath the island's eastern shore, what was coming. She would go home. Soon. Through a gate she now knew how to use. Between a world she had always known and a galaxy she was only beginning to understand. But Carter had mentioned, quietly, after the debrief concluded, that the ancient database contained coordinates for 11 other installations that matched the architectural profile of P4X 650. 11 other nodes in the pre-ancient network. 11 other locations where a dormant signature like her own might be waiting, sealed against a day when someone carrying the right bloodline came through the right gate. And Daniel had mentioned, equally quietly, that the pre-ancient script on the outpost wall, once he had a proper translation matrix established, appeared to describe a purpose for the network that was considerably larger than anything the ancients themselves had documented. The gate stood in its room 30 levels below her. 11 addresses waited in the database. Somewhere in the galaxy, Anubis was contained but not resolved, and the intelligence about the Themyscirus installation had spread further than one. System Lord's research files. Diana looked at the mountain dark outside the window and felt the pull that the chair had given her, the sense of the network alive and extended, threads of ancient intention running between the stars, connecting worlds that had been waiting for 3,000 years to be understood. There was work to do, more gates to step through, more false gods to drive back from coastlines that didn't belong to them. She found she was looking forward to it. What began as an impossible arrival in a military installation's gate room became something the SGC would spend years trying to properly classify. Diana of Themyscira did not fit any existing category in Hammond's organizational framework, not ally, not asset, not consultant. The closest approximation was partner, in the oldest sense of the word, someone who stood beside you when the odds were unreasonable and the mission was necessary and there was no good answer, only the best available one. She had walked through a gate she didn't understand, into a universe she hadn't known existed, and instead of retreating to the familiar, she had learned the shape of the new world and found her place in it. The ancients had built her bloodline for a purpose they had not lived to explain. The galaxy was full of false gods who confused power with legitimacy. And somewhere in the network of addresses that the Stargate connected, 11 installations waited with questions that only she could answer. In the SGC mission files, her liaison agreement was logged under a designation that Daniel had suggested and Hammond had approved. The Themyscira Accord. It was, Carter noted, the first agreement in SGC history signed without any classified addenda, any oversight committee review, or any governmental authorization. It was also, O'Neill noted, the first one he'd seen in 7 years that both parties actually intended to keep. The gate would activate again in the morning. The next address was already in the system. Her journey through the stars had only just begun.